One of them wanted to be the security guy. He claimed he was a security guy.
Welcome to another pedantic version of Security Guy Radio. Every week I'm going to have a new word to describe our escapades here at the radio station. So we got two shows today.
Yeah.
It's another doubleheader. Anything going on?
Absolutely nothing.
That's excellent. I love to hear that. Mr. Bryan, I cannot hear myself in the microphone. Am I on the air?
The world is peaceful. I can hear you.
All right, excellent.
Yeah, the world is peaceful.
All right, that's very good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, we're not going to talk about a peaceful subject today. What are we going to talk about?
Guns in the workplace.
Guns in the workplace. Now, at the studios after 9/11, we were shocked to discover.
I would say, actually, well, I'm never surprised, just disappointed.
That's true. No, we must have taken what? What did you think, like 50 guns one day?
50 guns, yeah, and the first day that we started. Well, what happened after 9/11, we started to search everybody's trunk.
Right.
Or boot, as it's commonly known.
Mind the gap.
Yeah, but we found, about 50 firearms in people's cars.
Despite the fact that we had giant
no weapons
signs that said no weapons. Right.
So all the rules in the world.
Well, what was interesting is I think when you hired me, you said I couldn't carry a gun at work.
Well, that's because I wouldn't trust you working.
Well, that's a good point. I
had a psychological evaluation.
Well, I mean, this is controversial, right? Because if people have a permit and it's legal, the question is, will they be effective in an active shooter or a violent intruder situation? And everybody wants to know the answer to that. And I'm not so sure there is an answer. I don't think that my personal opinion is I'm not sure it is going to be effective. But it's hard to say, and there's something new you told me about today that I was surprised about that just came up, which is going to turn all this into something very, very important for people to listen to. It's almost a Security Guy Radio exclusive again.
Almost, because there's not a lot of people talking about it.
No.
The fact that you didn't know.
That's right, and I know everything, and I didn't know.
I wasn't surprised. I was just disappointed.
Okay. Tell everybody about this new it's a new law. Somebody challenged the CCW law, and it's going to open up the ability for average people to get a CCW.
Yeah.
Let's hear about it.
Well, and you know, I mean, in a short version of it, and this really sort of brings it in line with a lot of the other states, because a lot of states are a lot easier on CCWs. But basically what, in a 2-1 decision, the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco last week said that the San Diego County violated the constitutional Second Amendment by requiring residents to show good cause. Okay, and it really came out of a finding that you couldn't carry openly.
Right, the original case was you cannot carry an open gun. California outlawed that years ago.
Yeah, but basically what the court said was you can't ban both, and you've got a right to carry outside of the home, which I found very interesting, and that came from the U.S. Supreme Court in was it 2008, I think.
Right.
They found that. So basically what they've done is opened it up. So as long as you can show that you're of good moral character, whatever the hell that means, okay, and you do a background and all the rest of the good stuff and some training, the sheriffs or whoever the issuing authority is cannot refuse you a CCW. So it's going to be interesting to see who actually applies, you know, whether it's going to be guys from the inner city, from suburbia. It's going to be very interesting to see how this affects.
And that's the 9th Circuit.
That's the 9th Circuit.
Was that the Court of Appeals? Must have been.
Court of Appeals, yeah.
Yeah.
U.S. Circuit.
That's significant.
It's significant, especially the fact it's a 9th Circuit. You know, because a lot of people think the 9th Circuit is a little bit liberal. I actually think that it's personally, I think that it's a logical finding. I mean, it's just logical. So we'll see where it goes. Very interesting.
So the effect will be that are people applying for permits right now? Is that what's going on?
There is a stay. I'm not sure. I couldn't quite find out whether the stay was just in San Diego County or whether it's for the whole state. But there's definitely a stay in San Diego County while they try and appeal it.
And this applies to all sheriffs and or chiefs?
Absolutely everybody.
So a local PD would be required to issue one, unless absent good cause for denying it.
Yeah.
They could do it.
They can't.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I think that falls in, I mean, our guest here would probably know a lot more about it, but I think that falls a lot more into the line of a lot of the states, you know, because California has always been a lot more conservative, interestingly, in regard to CCWs and a lot of the like Texas, you know, than a lot of the other states.
Well,
I think
Illinois
it falls in lines.
Illinois just opened that up. They were the last state where, you know, I can carry in 50 states, except I could not carry in Illinois because they said so. And now they just fixed that in January.
Yeah.
So I think you're allowed with your permits. And now they have to issue permits as well or something. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
And I think that came out of an appeals court.
Yeah, because, again, when somebody's trying to skirt the Second Amendment, they wind up, you know, opening it up, really. I mean, somebody challenged this law and said, hey, if you can't let me carry in the open, which used to be permitted, then, you know, it's the same effect as carrying concealed.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if it's good or bad. You know, I guess it depends what side of the fence you're standing.
And since we don't know anything, because we're just a couple of guys who do a radio show, we have to bring in our guests who actually know something, because everybody stopped paying us to give them advice. And that's why we have Dr. Steve Albrecht here, PHR, CPP, BCC. Is there a PhD in there?
There's not, but there's DBA. I could tell you about that if you want.
As a trainer, speaker, author, and consultant, Dr. Albrecht is internationally known for his expertise in high-risk HR issues. He provides consulting, threat assessment, site surveys, corrective coaching, and training seminars in workplace violence prevention, harassment prevention, drug and alcohol awareness, team building, conflict resolution, high-risk customer service, and stress management. In 1984, he co-wrote Ticking Bombs, that's Defusing Violence in the Workplace. 94, so you've been in this space a long time.
20 years.
20 years. And you're a retired San Diego police officer. Is that correct?
Yep.
That's kind of interesting. Very interesting. So this guy knows what he's talking about. We
Sort
get some good guests on our show
we
here,
do.
don't we?
We're the best.
Trying to be a scholar warrior. That's what I'm trying to be.
So what's your general take on employees carrying concealed weapons? Here's what I know. I know that we don't know how many people carry weapons, and what I do know is a lot of people do, and we don't know it. And we were talking about before the show that, you know, women that are victims of domestic violence or stalkers, they don't care what the law says. If they think they're going to die, they're going to start packing, and we may have Sally, the receptionist, has got a .44 Magnum in her purse. We don't know it, right?
If you back up just even to the folks that carry pepper spray at work, which is usually against policy for a lot of organizations, not even to bring OC pepper spray in. Now take that into the realm which you had said. A lot of women carry guns that nobody knows about. I talk about this to cops. How many officers ask women, you know, in a traffic stop, do you have a gun in the car? Almost never. They would ask that question to males, certainly. 22 states and counting here have moved towards allowing employees with concealed weapons permits to bring their guns to work, which is a big controversy with the human resources folks. PHR for me stands for Professional in Human Resources. I have a certification from SHRM, which is the biggest HR organization in the world.
Even in California?
Yep.
That's impressive. That's a hard one.
Society for Human Resource Management has come out and said organizations should have the right via policy to say you can't bring a gun to work even if the county or the state allows you to. Now the state is allowing, you know, upwards of 22 states for folks to bring guns to work. SHRM's position is you shouldn't be allowed to bring your gun because the organization who you know runs the facility should have the last word. The states say too bad. So now, sort of in terms of splitting the baby, many states have said, okay, if you have a concealed weapons permit, you can bring your gun to work, but you got to leave it in your car. Some states have that distinction. Some states do not. It's a mess.
So the states have actually said that you've got to leave it in the car, or do they leave that?
Or allow it?
Or the employees?
The states have done that as a way to appease the human resources people and the security people that say we're uncomfortable with the idea of folks bringing guns to work without some barrier, some boundary.
Okay, so if I have a CCW and my employer doesn't want guns on the property, I don't have too much of a problem with that. I mean, don't they have some private property rights to say, okay, it's your house, it's your business, it's whatever, we're not going to permit that? How can the state then step in and say you have to allow an employee to bring a gun on private property?
Well, I think the state's perspective is in for a penny, in for a pound. Once you've allowed folks to bring guns to work, then making a distinction whether it's on the parking lot or brought inside the building is not as much their concern.
No, I get that part, but I would just say if there's no guns in Fox, we don't want them on the property at all, and I would be okay with that. I would let that choice be up to an employer. So it's either one or the other. It's you get to bring it to work. Are there some places where the law is you're allowed to bring it to work, but some policies still say no? We don't care what the law says.
I'll give you a parallel in the college campus discussion, which is just as much of a concern. In Utah, if you're a concealed weapons permit holder as a student, you can bring your gun into a college and university campus in Utah.
Right.
Colorado has a similar law. They're the most flexible in terms of that issue. Other states have said, okay, you can possess a firearm on a college campus. I think there's 5 or 6 other states. But you can't bring it onto campus. It has to stay in your car. So the car seems to be the buffer for a lot of things you're talking about, either on a college campus or in a professional building, which says, okay, we're going to go along with the law, but we have some distinction about whether you actually bring it into the property.
Well, keeping your car will just create a new cottage industry of drive-by shootings. Why get out of your car to shoot up the school? Just drive by and shoot it.
Yeah, my perspective is in more car burglaries than you can shake a stick at, because
that's right.
If the average street, dope-using gun seeker says, well, here's a building that has maybe 1,000 people in it and 400 cars in the parking lot, and it's not protected, and that's a distinction I think the businesses have to make. You say, okay, if we're in a state where guns are allowed to be brought onto our property in terms of the parking lot, then we've got to hire security to watch the parking lot more effectively than we're doing now.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know if there's any stats out there at this point. Have you seen any stats in regard to, vehicle thefts, break into vehicles in car parks?
I've not seen some stats, but the anecdotal issues come up all the time. We've heard cases of accidental discharges, horseplay, people getting their guns stolen from people at work. I mean, it's a very complex issue because you bring an X factor in that just wasn't there before.
Well, that's interesting because they're going to be wearing that gun when they arrive at work. Now they've got to take it out of the holster or whatever they're keeping it in, put it in their glove compartment. You got to get guns going off.
Or it never comes out of the glove compartment and stays in there, and that's what makes it the burglary risk. I mean, how many cars do you have to break into? And it's pretty easy to break into a car. In California, we seem to have the record for auto theft, where you get 5 or 6 Glocks at $600-700 a piece. That's a good day's work.
Any states require building gun lockers or something like that?
It's not come up so far, and that I think is where we're shifting the barriers to say, how about registration, where you say, okay, I'm an employee, I'll have a confidential note put in my file, that says, it's a green card or a purple card or a yellow card that says this guy has a firearm. How about a gun locker at work? So the tough part of this issue, from a workplace violence perspective, which is all I ever think about as to what this is do guns in the work environment, either in the parking lot or in the actual building, make the environment more safe? And that's the $64,000 question. Is access to a firearm in prevention of an active shooter actually going to work?
Well, proponents claim that areas that have high CCW, by the way, that means carrying a concealed weapon in California, but some states call it CPC, other acronyms basically. What means carrying a concealed weapon?
Right, concealed carries.
Concealed carry, right. In some areas, they claim that high incidence of CCWs equate to lower incidence of crime, lower incidence of violence, because now you really don't know at work who's packing. Is it Sally or Billy? They got a 44 in their desk, and maybe I shouldn't come in here and act like a fool.
But are those stats really from street crime or?
I think it's just in general. I mean, protecting of houses or saving lives in different situations. A lot of it has to do, I think, with home invasions and street robbers and things like that. But I don't know. I was in Arizona, pumping gas about 4 or 5 years ago, and I turn over and here's some guy with a 45 pumping gas, and I kind of went, ugh. I wasn't aware that was okay. And I thought, is this guy whacked or is that the law? But you can carry open, and it looked like the clip was loaded. And then I started thinking, well, I don't think anybody's going to rob this gas station, right? It's the Wild West, right? So it's hard to say.
I think I've got a problem with it being in employment area. You've got a lot of people working together, high emotions sometimes.
Discipline, terminations.
Yeah. I mean, how the hell do you deal with a termination?
Well, you got to change your whole policies on that one. Yeah, that would be true. But you don't know if the guy's going to come back. I mean, so does it make it any more probable that guy with the gun's going to come back and shoot somebody? I'm thinking probably not, but we don't know. Perfect timing for our police segue music to a commercial. We'll be back in a minute on Security Guy Radio. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio. You know what I forgot to do at the beginning of the show?
What was that?
Mention that Jared has completed the website.
Oh, yes, that's right.
That's
it
right.
looks very nice.
And for my mother, who still uses www, it is www.securityguyradio.com. It is up and running. Excellent, Brian. Thank you. Interesting statistics. We've been up technically since last Tuesday, I think it is. And we've had approximately 1,000 visits from 26 countries.
Yeah.
I was very surprised. Very surprised.
What was the weirdest one? Well, I hate to say the weirdest one, because if you live in that country, it's not weird, right? But for us.
Well, let's say concerning, I had, let's just say, Dubai concerned me, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia.
How about Ukraine?
I've got a lot of
Ukraine,
friends out there,
Ukraine,
actually.
Ukraine concerned me. There were a lot of, let's just say, non-friendly countries that visited. But, listen, if we can.
Any from North Korea? Oh, they probably.
It wasn't North Korea.
They probably can't even get the internet, right?
No, I should get the list together. It was really kind of interesting.
Maybe they're American expatriates over there, huh?
Could be. That's
Could be.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
China. A lot of looks from China,
That's
from
good.
Russia. Yeah. Yeah, they're probably going to suck my website out and steal everything and, make their own version of it. Not so Security Guy Radio or something. Anyway, so please go to securityguyradio.com so I can know. Oh, and then what else did we get last week? We got our listener statistics.
Oh, that's right.
Brian, we don't call them statistics. Give me the radio nomenclature. What is that? The ratings?
Demographics.
Demographics.
Oh,
okay.
I would have said ratings.
Is that what that pie chart was? I wasn't paying attention, actually, to all the pretty pie colors. But basically, we have about 1,100 listeners live per week, and then there's podcasts and things. And, Mr. Brian, you claim that's a good number for a new show?
That's a great number. It feels like we've done 100 shows, but we've only been on the air. This will probably be the beginning of beginning or middle of the third month.
That's right.
Yeah,
right.
good.
And so we initially we talked about putting out about 2,000 postcards, and so we have a 50% return on people listening. So please, if you're out there, go to the website, make my stat counter go up so we can make sure that.
And again, we've had some great guests.
Is this thing on? Is this thing on? I want to make sure people are listening. So no, it's a good guess. All right, so we're back with Dr. Steve Albrecht, PHR, CPP, BCC. And he's talking about guns in the workplace. Controversial issue because, as we talked about at the break, some people might think we're communists because we're all a bunch of ex-cops sitting here, and we have nothing against guns, but we all kind of think maybe, a 19-year-old who works in the mailroom shouldn't be carrying his Ruger to work with him because he doesn't know how to use it.
Or on campus.
Right.
Yeah.
So what say you?
My thing is, I believe in guns and the right to own guns and the American, history of guns. We have 280 million guns and 300 million people. But I also think there ought to be boundaries. And one of the boundaries is in a school, you have the emotions and dynamics of bad grades and expulsions and things like that. Now you're a professor, you have to have a meeting with a student. And in Utah and Colorado, this is possible. They could be armed coming into that meeting. Now, not everybody that carries a gun certainly have a potential for homicide, but we've seen the cases, and there's been no shortage of school shootings. We just had a presentation from the FBI expert on school shootings, and there's something like 39 shootings in college campuses in 2013. Now, not all of them make the newspapers out here, but 30 plus shootings in or around a college, university, or campus is a substantial amount.
It's significant. And here's my personal experience with that. I will not mention schools, but I will say at a school my daughter attended, she comes home 2 weeks post event and says, and she's about 9 or 10. Oh, Daddy, the teacher said everything's okay with that boy with the gun. I said, what? Boy with the gun? So what happened was some kid came in and said to the other kids, my dad has a gun, and I'm going to come back to school and shoot you guys. It's like a 10 or 11-year-old.
Mm.
Did the school call us up? Did the teacher or principal say, hey, just so you know, my daughter had to find out through something else. I went to the principal and said, that's not right, Oh, we're handling that, Mr. Harold. You don't really understand these things. That's right. I'm just in charge of a bunch of security things. I know nothing about it. And I pulled her out. That notification part was no good. And I've known of other schools where the school's been notified that little Billy, decided he was going to go get Grandpa's World War II rifle and had a list of people he wanted to zap. And the school just said, well, he wasn't really going to shoot anybody. And so this is going on all the time. And I've always told people, like you just said, there's all kinds of shootings around the world every day, a lot in the United States. You don't hear about them on the news unless it reaches a certain body count, which is just hideous, but that's how we are. And people need to take it much more seriously. The question is, will introducing weapons in the workforce curtail that, stop it? We do know in the statistics, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I get a little rusty, average shooting in a workplace or school happens, takes about 8 minutes. Every 1 or 2 minutes, 2 or 4 people are killed, and the cops don't get there for 10. So the cops are not going to stop the incident. However, there have been studies that when an employee intervenes, throwing a can of soda at the guy, or they rush him or something, they tend to give up, or they shoot themselves in the head. And when the cops show up, the cops kill them 85% of the time, or they shoot themselves in the head. So there is an argument to be made that this intervention during a shooting does curtail or stop these guys, because their psychological makeup is they're kind of a bunch of babies and they don't want confrontation.
But I think the argument is a qualified person who's carrying a firearm.
Well, but
that's the problem, isn't it?
But an active shooter,
trained, etc.
Yeah, but an active shooter training, you teach people to countermeasure by picking up books and throwing at them or tackling the guy.
Oh, and I'm talking about somebody carrying a firearm as a,
okay,
to stop somebody.
But if I'm throwing a book at you and I'm rushing you and that stops you from shooting, right? Or I'm a cop, I show up and you stop shooting. Yeah. If I pull up my gun and say, don't do that, I think you're going to stop shooting. It's not the strongest argument. I'm just saying, if we know the facts of employees surviving because they intervene somehow when it's a last resort, right? They don't have a choice. They can't run and they can't hide and they got to fight. It works. So, it's a tough call. I think you'll get trigger-happy people that start shooting first before they really look at it.
So if you go back to the national protocol, and you mentioned what it is, the national protocol is, in an active shooter, is run, hide, fight. Run out of the building, evacuate as safely as you can to a place of safety. And that could be a substantial distance away from the building. Second would be to hide out or shelter in place, lock down, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace that you can barricade the door and wait for the arrival of the police. And then the third is to fight back. My concern in the fighting back part, let's go to the firearms. If I had to rank folks that would be protecting my life or somebody I cared about in an organization, it would be somebody that had some kind of tactical training as part of their background, military, law enforcement, even security. So when we look at schools, and the big argument after Sandy Hook was, we don't have enough cops to put one in every school like they do in Israel. They have a cop or a soldier or an armed security in every school in Israel, 90,000 schools in the United States. So would we put people at least have some tactical security training that could actually, and this is a significant part, I talk to people that own guns, and the question I ask is, could you take another human being's life in the defense of your own or the defense of somebody else's life? And they say, sure, I could. I'm not always so sure. I think there's a mindset that if you cannot take another person's life in the defense of your own or somebody else's, you shouldn't be carrying a gun at work.
Well, that's a good point, because if you hesitate for a second, then it's going to cause a bigger problem. The gun can be taken away, and then we got a whole issue. You've had any cases you've studied or worked on where people have been dismissed or busted, or there was an intervention with a gun in the workplace?
If you look at California, where we talked about this at the opening of the show, the evolution of this concealed weapons issue. I mean, people have been fired for bringing guns to work. Even in Florida, Disney World fired an employee who brought a gun to work, even though you're allowed to bring guns to work, but against company policy at Disneyland.
Right.
So we have a collision between, we talked about this, the company policy versus the state's rights in this issue. And the problem there is who wins that battle? I'm for the protecting of organizations as best as we can, but can we have a measured response to this? A registration process, something that proves that you've got the training, that you didn't just take a 4-hour course and now you're qualified to protect the entire organization.
What about confidentiality? So let's say the law says you can carry and company policy says you can carry. Now, does the company need to know who those people are and identify them? Because that's not going to remain secret. You know that somebody's going to whisper that so-and-so has a gun. There's going to be an idiot that brags about it. And now that guy's a potential target because he has a gun, right?
And I think Paul's concern, too, is what's the liability if we know or don't know? And if
right.
we say, we knew about this guy, and yet there wasn't a way to secure your gun at the office, there wasn't a way to put it in a locked lockbox or container or something at the office, we knew about that, there was a discharge theft, accidental discharge type of thing, then where are we at liability-wise?
Well, and then there's the employer. Is there a liability on the employer to ensure that person actually does have a CCW, that they've got the required training, that they've had their annual training?
Well, that's a good point.
That's another HR issue, isn't it, that you got to follow up.
In the guard business, of course, you'd have to have all the permits, and it's our job to make sure they do. But I could see that an employer would then I'll be responsible. If I'm allowing you to have the gun, I better make sure you know how to use it. So we're going to put firing ranges in 7-Elevens now. Everybody testing. I mean, it can be problematic.
I know those permits, certified permits, as it were, available online, as they are with a guard. So you can look at BSIS to see if somebody's got their certifications. Would you be able to do that with a CCW?
I think the default position for most states that have passed these laws, the 22, 23 states that have passed these laws, have said, if you bring a firearm to work, we're already assuming that you have passed the CCW test, which means a firearms course, a safety course, and you've gone through an appropriate background mental health screening, and you have the right to own this firearm legally. So the distinction for all those checks and balances is already put in place once you get the CCW permit.
But how does the employer know?
Right. So the
that's
employer
the problem,
doesn't have to know under the state's situation. And another X factor is, let's say for whatever reason, you get arrested for some crime of violence and you manage to keep your job, but you get your CCW permit taken away. Then do you notify the employer about that, like a pull notice?
Oh, right.
Like you're an employee and you get a drunk driving arrest when you're a safety sensitive employee and you drive a truck for an organization. Is the same kind of notification there? Another complex issue.
So, I think it's probably. See, you couldn't get away with the employer not knowing. If you're an employer, you can't know because the law is going to say you knew or should have known. Because if you're allowing it to happen, then you absolutely have to know. And what are you going to bag check all the employees, make sure they do or don't have a gun?
But if the state's presumption is you have the ability to bring your gun into work, then you shouldn't ask as an employer. That's the problem.
I got an issue. OSHA. What does OSHA say about it? I bet you there's a contradiction there.
I think OSHA is defaults onto the general duty clause, which is organizations have a general duty to keep their employees safe using whatever means necessary to do so. Sharp objects, confined space, poison gas.
Hot, cold, whatever, right.
Firearms.
Oh, interesting.
It's an interesting dilemma for the employer.
Let's come back and talk about OSHA because I think that may be where somebody's going to challenge it and they might be able to win that. Back in a minute on Security Guy Radio. That's securityguyradio.com.
www.
Really, Mom? You're calling me when I'm on the air. Seriously? Seriously?
That's what mums are for.
She's calling me while I'm on the air. Increíble. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio. That's securityguyradio.com for all things security. Back with Chuck Harold and
Paul Bristow. Tally-ho.
And our special guest, Dr. Steve Albrecht. And we were talking about OSHA at the break.
Now, for those that don't know, what's OSHA stand for?
Occupational Health and Safety Standards.
Or Safety and Health Administration, one of the three.
Yeah. And there's Cal OSHA, and Cal OSHA's even worse because
Cal OSHA's hell.
More restrictive.
Yeah.
Now, we had a lot of experience with OSHA in the guard business because all kinds of things under there that you don't think about. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, and you really properly define the standard when you talked about that. It's vague and it's broad in a way.
General duty clause.
General duty clause.
Right.
And they kind of get into a lot of things, right? So I could see this falling under that. And the question is, if there was an active shooter and I'm a retired cop and I can't carry a gun because even though I'm highly trained and I could have done something about it, I didn't. Is that going to be on the employer now?
That's a good question.
Because there's a lot of retired cops in business now that have nothing to do with police force, but they carry. They're trained. There's military, ex-military that are trained. I think as a percentage of a workforce, you'd have a lot of these people appearing. Not a lot, but you'd have a percentage of, in every workforce, there's going to be an ex-cop, an ex-military guy, an ex-Marine, ex-Air Force, and they're going to have the ability to do that. So to your point, if we had the proper people designated for that, because if you could have and you didn't, and in OSHA, if somebody gets hurt or killed, the employer can be personally liable.
But again, I think as an employer, if you're going to say, Joe Blow, who used to be a cop, can now carry in my facility, then it's up to you to make sure that they've had the proper training. They were an ex-copper. They go down there every couple of months.
I guess you can't deny other people and allow others.
But yeah, you got a problem.
If you look at the officers that in the field, if you cannot not respond. I mean, part of being sworn is that you will respond to these situations. Right. But in an organization, ex-law enforcement, ex-military, even somebody who has a concealed weapons permit, I don't think we can put liability on somebody for failing to take action in an active shooter
No,
situation.
there's no affirmative duty to act, right?
But I'm sure the plaintiff's attorneys may come up with that argument. Here we are in a state where guns are allowed to be brought into this facility. You had one. My client was killed because your inability to engage with the active shooter and kill him. I'm going to sue you personally. I mean, that might be possible, even though we have restrictions to say you're not supposed to act. So that's a complex issue too. If you go back to the sort of primary concern, do we want first responders, which is usually armed police, to be the first folks on the scene? But back to your point, they get there oftentimes after these guys have committed suicide or have killed a lot of folks, and oftentimes they are stopped by someone who is brave and even unarmed, but sometimes not. So where's the liability concern for the organization to say we have people that have these ability to use these firearms but did not? Even if there's some type of waiver that says you don't have to take an action, I'm sure the plaintiff's attorney is going to say, well, if you had taken action, my client would still be alive.
So if you're advising a client in HR and legal, I suppose, what are you telling them are the best practices for this dilemma? Because this is really a difficult situation. We got three guys sitting here that have been carrying guns for years. We get it. We appreciate our constitutional rights, but we're not on the other side of, crazy survivalist stuff. No letters, please. How do you handle that? I mean, what do you advise people? This is really complex.
See, I actually remember dealing with this when the law came up in Texas originally, and
one of the stations down there.
It was, I think it was KRIV,
Yeah.
the Houston station. I mean, this was years ago when Texas first said you can carry your firearms into the workplace, and we went you will leave it in your car park in your vehicle route. The problem was at that point we didn't know whether people were bringing in their guns into the station or not. So it's and I don't think things have changed. I don't know you can change it.
Some of the laws that have come out in terms of allowing employees to bring their guns also have exemptions, like you can't bring it into a jail, you can't bring it into a courthouse, you can't bring it into a child custody type of situation. You can't bring it into an airport, a municipal, small airport, large airport. So there are restrictions. I mean, so it's not a blanket statement across the board that says you can bring it anywhere you want to. There's still a mental health facility, lockdown mental health hospital. I mean, I think some hospitals will say, we don't care what the state law is. You're not bringing a firearm into our environment.
So the question is, how are you able to make those exceptions as a state, and yet you say to the normal employer, you've got to accept people with CCWs?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like anybody thought this out.
It doesn't sound fair, right?
No, it doesn't sound fair.
So the reason they make the exception is for the emotionality of those typical organizations. A courthouse is an emotional place. A child custody hearing is an emotional place. A mental health facility is an emotional place.
You want to go to one of the studios? That's an emotional place.
That's true. Yeah, that's about as emotional as it gets.
So they are making, you're right, certain distinctions, but the employer. So if, you run a warehouse and you say we don't screen people coming in here, how many people have guns? The answer is who knows.
Now, here's something we need to talk about. When you go to people and advise them, do you find that a lot of these big companies do not have a comprehensive or any workplace violence program or policy?
I think they have it's across the spectrum. They have a rudimentary one at least. I mean, one thing about workplace violence, it is a mature subject now. So sexual harassment is a mature subject. We have a policy, we have an investigative process, we have consequences for perpetrators, we have support for victims. Workplace violence has evolved really from the 90s to say it's a mature subject. We have an access control issue, we have a weapons issue, we have a don't bring firearms, explosives to work. If you threaten, bully, hit, punch, intimidate, you're going to be disciplined or terminated or arrested. A lot of organizations have at least a rudimentary policy in place. The degree of sophistication for that policy needs to improve.
So I've been to a lot of, even when we were at the company that should not be named and the one before that should not be named, we were contractors, so we got hired to put guards in there. And sometimes they wanted weapons on the guard, sometimes they didn't want weapons. But almost in every one, can you think of one that somebody actually had a workplace violence policy?
No.
Surely a giant corporation you think does, but I found ones that don't.
Well, they normally had something that said there will be no workplace violence.
Right.
Well, yeah. Well, but I've seen some that don't even have that. In other words, they don't have any mechanism to deal with restraining orders. So if the guy, Susie's husband has a restraining order and because he's carrying a gun and they're worried about it, HR don't know about that, and oftentimes they don't know about it. So I don't know. It's just a tough one. It's really difficult to figure out what you can advise as a consultant on this, because the state has kind of created a mess by, trying to protect your Second Amendment, which I'm all for, by the way. But it's not so easy. It's not so easy a decision.
Are you seeing more training going into the active shooter side with companies, or are they still basically ignoring that issue, that particular issue, not violence at the workplace, but active shooter?
I think the use of the City of Houston, Texas video run, hide, fight, you both have seen.
Yeah, it's great.
It's good.
6 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, I use it a lot in training.
Yeah.
I always tell people, cut out the first minute and a half if you don't want to see a Vin Diesel lookalike,
Right.
shotgunning up the organization. They got a guy,
Yeah.
black clothing
Who blasts the guard because the guard's doing what? Chatting up with the girl. At the
Oh,
elevator.
that's right. That's right.
I thought you were going to say
Yeah.
looking at his
Yeah.
phone, but right.
Typical
Yeah.
guard stuff.
So 6 minute video. If you cut out the first minute and a half, I mean, it does make a strong message. Get out of the building safely, shelter in place in a locked room, and then fight back. What I'm seeing is a lot of people are getting that because it's free and it's on the internet. They can embed it into training programs. That one's quite popular. So I think it's got 2 million hits. That was a couple months ago that people have seen that. I think it's a worthwhile conversation. If that's all you have, that's at least part of the early discussion.
Well, they have Alice, which adds to that because they put alert in there, right? And then so it's alert, lockdown, information, counter, and evade or evacuate.
Right.
And that kind of works. But I'm still finding resistance to that. I have people call me about that training all the time and say, we want to do it. I go out there, do a pitch or do a PowerPoint, and they go, I think the parents wouldn't like it. My employees wouldn't like it. They get scared. I even do some training with Nerf guns to make them, instead of the airsoft, so they don't get so scared about it. And they still not sure. But when they do have it, they really buy into it. And then they don't feel so uncomfortable. They feel that they can do something about it. I think with the concealed weapon issue for an employee, if you do a run, hide, fight training, you're taking all the employees, giving them a training to act independently to save themselves.
Right.
But if we don't know who has a gun, that just puts a whole nother layer into that run, hide, fight. I mean, is everybody going to walk around and get suspicious and start diming people off? And I don't know.
Well, I suppose one of the questions is, as we said at the beginning, there's a lot of states that have got a CCW carry law. So have we seen anything, where somebody actually has a concealed weapons permit and comes back or is in there and causes violence in a workplace with his firearm?
Or save somebody who does something good.
Somebody,
We don't have a lot of data. There's not a lot of incidents on that. And
well, that's the data, though, isn't it?
Yeah, right. I think if you look at who's the groundbreakers on this, it's the schools. So even K through 12 and college universities, I mean, we're really seeing an evolution post Columbine, post Sandy Hook of an active shooter protocol, which is in parallel in partnership with law enforcement. It's in parallel in partnership with campus police. I mean, that's really a strong movement that we're seeing. Not so much as you've said in the private sector.
Well, I think state of Illinois just made it mandatory for schools. Yeah. So Ferdinand Hills High School, listen up and get that training. I think that's, I don't know, I just can't get my head around this. I'm kind of in the middle.
I tell you what I see is a lot of my clients are public sector, and there's a good partnership with law enforcement, good partnership with the sheriff's and police department about active shooter. We use the buildings that the sheriff and PD come into, City Hall and County Operations Building, really good training that's done there. So I think county employees are ahead of the curve on this issue. Private sector, not as much.
Mr. Brian, how much more time we got? 30 seconds? All right. I don't want to, if I start this segment, we got to try and finish in the next one, but we want to talk about best practices, right? So with all these complications, what are you going to advise an employer to do? I would love to hear that answer because I think it's going to be a Lulu. Back in a minute on Security Guy Radio. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio.
I
Ryan?
should have done the introduction.
You should have.
Still should have had mint in
Ryan
your
caught
mouth.
me with a mint in my mouth. You did see me eating a mint and decided to roll the music. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you very much. Welcome back to Security Guy Radio. That's www.securityguyradio.com. Please log in tonight so I can see if anybody's actually listening. Back with Dr. Steve Albrecht, Mr. Paul Bristow.
Hello.
Now, we lifted the break talking about the CCWs for employees. At the break, we discussed talking about a best practice. Let's pretend I'm Mr. HR, and you're going to tell me what to do about this dilemma, because I think it's a big mess. I'm HR, and I have no idea what to do about this.
Okay, as our psychologist friends say, let's get really real.
That's right.
The first step would be to verify that the employee has a CCW permit. You have a right as an employer to ask for a copy.
Okay, stop right there. How do you know it's not a fake?
Okay, so you get a copy of it. There's some mechanism within the county you can call and verify, just like we verify engineering licenses or medical licenses or chiropractic license. There has to be a mechanism in place to be
I wonder if there is.
Are they quasi-public record
someone to
of
find
a
out.
weapon? I'm not sure.
I think the Freedom of Information Act, I think the newspapers can get copies.
Well, that's
of
true.
Yeah.
Some newspapers
Weapons
do
I
that.
bet it's not easy, no. I
Right.
bet it's not easy.
So let's say that you're able to verify that the weapons permit exists. That goes into the employee's file. And then the employee has some choice as to whether or not they don't have to necessarily bring their gun to work. But how about a floor warden system where you say, okay, in the event of an active shooter, are you willing to step up and protect yourself and protect other people in this organization because you've brought a firearm into this facility or you brought one into your car? And how about a floor warden system where we designate certain people that step up and want to take that responsibility?
Now, that's how you handle it, because when you sit in an emergency exit on a plane, what do? It's a legal questioning. Are you capable to open the door? Will you get up? If you don't, you got to move. So if you say, okay, Paul, you can bring your gun to work, but our policy is if you got one, you're going to have to be proficient at it, make sure it's permitted, and we want you to be one of these designees that's going to help us at an active shooter. And you have a right to say no. And if you say no, does that now allow the employer to say, you know what, you're not going to use it? What's the point of having it? You're protecting yourself, but you're not going to protect somebody sitting next to you?
So if you're on the plane and you say no to the security questions, they moved you a new seat.
They moved to a new seat.
I've never seen anybody say no, actually. But if you've got a floor warden program like that, and you've got people with CCWs, etc., and you're going to say you're going to protect us,
Well, you can't make them, but you can ask them.
Can you?
Right.
As an employer, does the simple CCW training really cover you to say that person's going to try and protect us if there's a problem?
And the answer is no.
Exactly.
Yeah, the answer is no.
You know.
Because, and we know this, that the training across all 50 states is not mandatory and uniform in terms of, is it combat oriented? Is it punching holes in paper targets? Yeah. I mean, one of my colleagues, John Morrison, he writes for American Handgunner and Guns and Ammo. He says there's a significant psychological shift, and we know this, from shooting holes in paper targets at a range. It's sort of like I can swim in the pool, but I can't swim very well in the ocean. So, I mean, I've done triathlons where I'm able to swim in the pool quite effectively, not so well in the ocean. So I can punch holes in paper targets, someone says, but could actually shoot at another human being. I think that's a huge psychological shift, and here's why. We hire in law enforcement and in fire departments counterintuitive responders, people that move towards danger and away from safety. The natural human condition is to move away from a guy with a gun. Right. Cops move towards guys with guns and women with guns, and towards fires and things like that, because that's what we screen for.
We like it.
So if you don't have the wherewithal to do that, and I'm not saying everybody needs to or does, then don't bring your gun to work. I mean, it's one thing to protect your home and family, and another thing to protect total strangers that you work with. If you don't have that psychological bridge that you've already crossed, then don't bring your gun to work.
Well, I mean, I could tell you, having been highly trained, one of the highest trained officers in the Metropolitan Police in England. When the first firefight I got in England, it was totally different from any training that I'd ever been through. I couldn't imagine somebody that's had 16 hours of a CCW. Now, you've done the CCW training, correct? For your
I've done. I have to do it for the PD, and I have to do it for the state. You have to have redundancy in the training, and now I had to do it for the federal carry across 50 states. So that's more. Now that training, I actually had to shoot off like a couple hundred rounds, but the regular training with BSIS or the state's kind of like 25 yards, stand and ready, and it's not combat. And here's another good point. We know as cops that if we get in a firefight, we miss what percentage of the time? 85% of the time we don't hit our target. Yeah. That's the stress. That's duck and cover and bob and weave, right? So I'm going to retract my earlier idea about the floor warden program because that guy, even if I'm an off-duty cop, and I haven't been trained, and I'm retired, and now I'm working at Fox because I'm retired for 15 years. I'm not as active as I used to be. I'm not as sharp a shot. You know, I'm proficient in how to handle it safely, and I feel good about that of an employer. If you and I are all sitting there with our firearms training, but you're right. Yeah, it's in a shootout situation. It's not the same thing. I've only been shot at, and here's the irony on that: 3 different occasions. I was in a position where I could not return fire because I couldn't see where the bullets were coming from one case. I was on a roof in another case, and there was people standing, between me and the shooter, and that makes you feel terrible. I mean, so it's not so easy as everybody's thinking on this.
Well, from an employer's standpoint, if you're standing in court and you've got an expert witness, and they're saying you gave this guy permission to return fire if there was an issue, but he didn't have any training, or he just had the 16 hours of CCW training, I mean, you're going to rip him apart, right, as an expert witness?
Well, I mean, yeah, we're in the double-edged sword again. What kind of waiver does he have to sign that says I want to volunteer to do this? And what kind of we're not deputizing these folks. We're not deputizing these employees.
But you are in a way, aren't you? As an employer, you're saying
they're condoning it.
But we're not giving them powers of arrest or say you must go forward and take a life. We're saying you have to follow the same reasonable standard of care as any other citizen that has this weapons permit outside at the gas station or on his front lawn or at the liquor store when the bad guy comes in with a gun.
So let's talk about standard of care. I think this is where we can solve this issue. So we have all 3 of us work in the workplace, and you have a Glock, and you have a pith helmet, and I got a stapler. And the guy comes in, and you can't engage in the shooting, and your pith helmet only scares him to run the other direction. But I pick up the stapler and I jam it down his noggin and I kill him with the stapler. If I kill him with the gun or kill him with the stapler, it's the same issue, okay? Because I took act that was escalation of force.
And were you reasonable? And
was it reasonable? And probably if he's shooting and I kill him with the stapler, that's probably reasonable, right? I think this whole gun thing makes it too sexy for people to get their head around because
the problem
proper
is,
use of force makes sense.
But how many other people can you kill with a stapler?
No, I don't disagree with that.
That's the issue with it.
But if I engage the guy, personally, because all I can do is grab him and we toss around and I grab his gun and shoot him, that's a proper use of force in that case if he's trying to kill everybody. So you and I, all 3 of us, may not act for all kinds of good tactical reasons because we get that. And people could criticize us and say, you had a chance to shoot him. Yup, but it would have hit Betty right behind him.
Background
Target
issues, acquisition, darkness.
That every average guy that shoots for 8 hours for 8 rounds doesn't get, right?
So maybe if I could just put a fine point on maybe the good part of it. We talked about what's the deterrence factor, and I do believe there is a deterrence factor. So if you say, how many guys show up at a police station to shoot it out with the cops? Well, only one type of guy. He wants to commit suicide. That's what he does. How many guys show up at a school or a mall or a church or another soft target, elementary school, college campus with no campus police, or show up at an organization where they know that no one in there has a firearm? I think there is a definite deterrence factor for the possibility that somebody there could return fire and stop the threat.
Well, that was proven in the Colorado Theater, from what I read somewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong. The shooter lived very close to a movie theater, but he did not go to that movie theater because there was just a security guard there, unarmed security guard. Not anybody was armed, so he picked a softer target, was a theater without a guard. So I think there's a factor
it's
there.
An interesting fact that I believe every shooting recently has been in areas where guns are banned. That's a very interesting fact.
Virginia Tech had a policy against weapons on campus, I think, and things like that.
Well, there's a big discussion amongst the gun rights proponents about gun-free zones, and actually that means more homicides, more shootings.
Well, that's correct. So maybe the state is not as dumb as we thought, and by letting this open and letting people if they don't know, am I going to take a chance? I am going to take a chance if it says no guns on campus.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So the soft target is an attractive location for some of these perpetrators for sure. We know that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You have any cases of anything good coming out of this that you've heard of?
Well, I think if you go back to the law enforcement piece, there was a cop eating at a cheesecake factory in Utah, and when this kid came into the mall, he engaged and shot the kid. I mean, when you look at the right people in the right situation, that there are some examples where certainly law enforcement has done the right thing. In some cases, security has done the right thing. But we still have a long way to go for this issue. Security training in terms of carrying firearms, I have a concern that we hire people, we give them a firearm in a security position. Will they still take action against an active shooter? If you look at the Navy Yard case that happened in December, there's some concerns about the guard did not engage with the perpetrator in that case.
Yeah, there's no affirmative duty to act in a lot of things. I mean, you have affirmative duty to your child. There's not necessarily an affirmative duty to your cousin, right? And certainly to put yourself in peril, even as a cop, we don't have a strictly affirmative duty to engage, but we get administratively taken care of if we didn't, obviously, right? So that's a tough one. I don't know. Do I hear the music? We have to vote on this now. All right. I'm going to go with no guns concealed in the workplace. I'm going with that.
I've got to go with that as well, I must say.
What do you say?
I'm going with that too, except if we can come up with a plan and policy and some boundaries that make it sound feasible.
Right, and I'd be all for that. It's too much stuff to get around. It's just too much. Now, where'd the music go, Brian? I have to twang you with my magic flashlight here. All right. Remember to listen to securityguyradio.com. That's www.securityguyradio.com. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter. What else we got there? LinkedIn.
Everywhere.
And YouTube. All our videos are on YouTube now as well. See you next Monday.
Cheers.